The gentlelady's time's expired. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Curbelo, who is chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity, and thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony and for being here today. You mentioned fraud, and we discussed it extensively here. I wanted to ask you, how are you balancing this issue of suppressing fraudulent refund payments and at the same time doing your best to ensure that those valid, the overwhelming majority of refund claims, are paid expeditiously? Has this been difficult given the growing level of sophistication of some of these criminals that are presenting false claims?
It is. I think one of the things that's going to happen is that on the online authentication, to get online responses from us, you'll have to meet a higher threshold of authentication, and we expect that that means more won't get through. You'll still be able, we'll mail you transcripts, we'll mail you information, but it'll take you a few days longer. But one of the best things we've done is a year ago, as this problem continued to become more complicated, I brought together the CEOs of the major tax preparers, H&R Block, Intuit, and others, the software developers, payroll providers, and the tax administrators and commissioners from the states. And I told them that the reason for this meeting was not for me to tell them what to do. The reason was to create a real partnership between the private sector, the states, and the Internal Revenue Service to deal with fraud and identity theft and refund fraud. And it's been very successful. In fact, it's interesting to me, the most enthusiastic participants are the private sector members who went beyond asking and began to sort of request and demand that we make it permanent, which we are doing. Because what it allows us all to do, the states, the tax preparers, and the software developers and us, is exchange information in real time during the tax season, which we've done this year, which allows us to spot suspicious patterns of activity much earlier. But it also allows us to develop more and more sophisticated filters and authentication. So this year, I was told by one of the preparers, well, the IRS have to set standards. And I said, well, I'm happy to set the standards if you'll help design them, because I don't want to tell you again what to do. So this year, everyone who used software or everyone who went to a preparer had a higher level of authentication than they had last year, set by, in effect, the industry. All of the industry participants have agreed to a higher level of security. Many of them were already at that level, so we'd have a standard level of security. The states have been, we have 40 states who are cooperating with us. And so our goal is, as I told them, the reason for creating that partnership was because no one of us can solve this problem on our own. And it has been a great example of what happens if you get a public-private partnership where it's a real partnership of what you can accomplish. And so I think the most significant step forward we're going to be able to make is taking what we call the entire tax ecosystem, from the time you actually use the software or use a preparer till the time you file, and we're now working with financial institutions to the time that refund is deposited. If we can have that entire circle, sharing information, tracking down criminals, it will allow us to, in fact, let legitimate taxpayers through with more security. A big step forward, and again, I appreciate the support from Congress, is the requirement that goes into effect next year that we get W-2s at the same time the employees do. Historically, we've not gotten the W-2s until March or April, well after the time refunds go out. It will allow us to detect fraud, but also what it allows us to do is detect legitimate taxpayers. Last year, we stopped over 4 million suspicious returns out of the 150 million. Well, a chunk of those, about 1.5 million, were clearly fraudulent and were about $8 billion of refunds we stopped, but obviously a couple million were legitimate taxpayers. The W-2s earlier will allow us to authenticate taxpayers, so many of them won't be delayed very much in their refunds at all. But it's a sort of a complicated picture, but I think we're making progress.
I thank you, and I also want to commend you on really trying to change the perception and perhaps the culture of the agency, making it more approachable so that people feel comfortable knowing that the IRS is actually going to help them file their taxes as opposed to somehow get them in trouble or confuse them or discriminate against them. So I certainly do commend you for that, because as you know, many small business owners, many individual filers feel like they have to hire someone just because they don't feel the agency is approachable, just because they're paranoid, they're scared. So I certainly commend you on your work to change that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman